leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC with Ian Dale at Drive. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC.
Hello, very good evening to you. This is LBC. You're listening to Ian Dale at Drive. It's 3 minutes past 6. For the next hour, we're going to be debating the EU referendum with Chris Grayling from Vote Leave and Yvette Cooper from Britain Stronger in Europe. You will no doubt have lots of questions to put to them. 0345 6060 973. We've switched on the cameras as well because we're all beautiful people in the studio tonight. lbc.co.uk is where you need to go, or you can watch it on the LBC Facebook page and take part in the debate by commenting on that page. It apparently gets a bit lively from what they tell me. I've looked at some of the comments and they're about right. Chris, Yvette, welcome. 9 days to go. You're not looking too tired.
Yes.
You probably feel it.
Yes. I think a summer holiday won't go amiss when this is done, but
Well,
there's 8 or 9 days of intense campaigning to go.
I think we're going to get straight into the calls. Kizzy in Chesterfield is our first caller. Kizzy, what would you like to ask?
Oh, good evening, right, Yvette and Chris. My question is, has Nigel Farage been a positive influence on the EU debate?
Chris Grayling.
Well, he's certainly played a role in the last few years in helping to raise awareness of various issues related to the EU campaign. But, I mean, I think this has been a team effort. It's been a team effort across the spectrum. We have people from Nigel Farage at one extreme, John Mann, Labour MP at the other extreme at the moment. In fact, even probably Dennis Skinner, who is an old-fashioned left-winger in the Labour Party on the other side. So both campaigns, really. I mean, certainly the Leave campaign is a broad coalition of individuals, and I think both sides are, really.
Would you not say that this referendum wouldn't have happened without Nigel Farage?
I don't think I'd go that far. I mean, there has been a tide in this country that has said we want to have a chance to have a vote on our future in the European Union again. People have been saying this for many years. Of course, the rise of UKIP has played a part in that. But I wouldn't have said that the referendum is down to Nigel Farage, nor would I say that he's had no involvement in getting it.
Well, some people would say that it's entirely to his credit that there is a referendum because your party has had to keep him at bay, and the only way to do that is by having a referendum.
I think we'd have had a referendum anyway, personally. Once we had a majority Conservative government back again, which we've had since last year, I think the referendum issue would not have gone away. It's something that Conservatives feel very strongly about. We have people across the party who think we need the right to have a say in the changes that have happened. Should we stay or should we leave?
Yvette Cooper, I'm going to assume that you think he's probably on balance been negative in this campaign. Can you say anything positive about Nigel Farage?
Well, I think it's hard to see now why actually the Tory right, the hard right of the Tory party ended up fighting so hard to have a separate campaign from Nigel Farage's, because actually the campaigns have ended up looking very similar. I think they have been sucked into quite a Nigel Farage approach to things. The sort of dishonesty really about some of the facts, about the figures on the side of their bus, about all their claims about Turkey and so on are not true, and have quite a Nigel Farage feel to them. Obviously, some of the stuff that the Nigel Farage organisation was doing today, some of the posts they put out today, I think was really horrible, and I think the Leave campaign has rightly criticised it as well. So there've been some nasty things that they've been doing as well. But in the end, what you want to have is a sensible debate about what is good for our kids' future, and we should be able to do that without the misinformation that we've had from both the Leave campaign and the Nigel Farage.
Do you think he's been guilty of using some fairly extreme language? Some have called it racist language.
I think there are times, look, there's a lot of things that he said which are not racist, clearly. There are times where he has said things which I think cross the line. I think their poster today certainly crossed the line, which was obviously about Orlando.
I've got this poster here in front of me. They have actually withdrawn this.
Yeah, and rightly so.
Let me just read it, though. Islamist extremism is a real threat to our way of life. Act now before we see an Orlando-style atrocity here before too long. Some would say that's a statement of fact.
I just think, well, it is awful, exploiting a really awful tragedy, this homophobic attack that has happened in the States, and somehow trying to link this to a debate about the European Union, somehow trying to link Islamist extremism with the European Union. I just think that is the wrong thing to do. And to be fair, it is right that they have withdrawn it, and it is right that others, on all sides of the debate have condemned it, because we shouldn't be exploiting tragedies like that.
There'll be many people on your side of the argument who think think that's a fair comment.
Well, look, I think exploiting a tragedy about which we don't know the full details, we don't know the circumstances, it looks like this was a lone operator rather than a terrorist plot. We're not certain about the mental state of the man who carried out the attacks. And, of course, there are families grieving in the United States today. So I am not at all in favour of anyone using an event like this, a tragic event, for campaigning purposes. And, yeah, of course, it is true that Islamic extremism poses a threat to our way of life. But I also want to say that the vast majority of the Muslim population in this country have nothing to do with it and regard it with the same horror that we all do. So what we mustn't do in this country is fall into the trap of thinking that an extremist ideology reflects a community that's actually an important part of our country.
Do you think Nigel Farage falls into the trap of uttering borderline racist comments from time to time?
Well, I haven't heard Nigel say anything in this campaign that could be interpreted that way. And the fact is that the debate about immigration in this campaign is the right debate. It's about pressure on our schools, on our hospitals.
I'm sure we'll come on to that debate in a minute, so let's not go down that road too much. Kizzy, a brief word from you.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the one thing that Nigel Farage has actually brought is passion. And you don't really hear a lot of passion, especially from the Remain side, about wanting to stay in. And I do think that Nigel's got a lot to lose if we have Brexit, in terms of he loses his job, and also in terms of the fact that he does have a German wife himself, and if there were certain restrictions, it could impact on his family's life. So, you know,
I don't think anybody's suggesting that Mrs. Farage would have to go back to Germany.
I think he'll cope. I think he'll find a good job as a stockbroker again.
Kizzy, just before I let you go, are you a sort of down the line UKIP supporter?
I am absolutely not. I am a paid up Labour Party member, actually, believe it or not, who wants to vote to leave. So
this is the dilemma for the Labour Party, because there's an awful lot of people like you who are listening to this, who are thinking about how they're going to vote up and down the country, who are dyed-in-the-wool Labour supporters, who are not in the same place as the leadership of their party at the moment.
And that's a real problem, Yvette, isn't it?
Yeah, and the thing I guess I'd say, Kizzy, is that in the end, the Labour values have always been about being stronger together than if you leave people to sink or swim alone. And something like workers' rights, for example, by working together with other countries to stop companies and countries undercutting our workforce is really important. So, the things that we work together to deal with climate change, or the things to deal with the security threat that we face in so many areas, I think our manufacturing jobs would be at risk from losing trade if we pulled out.
It's not getting through to people like Kizzy, is it?
Look, don't get me wrong, I think Labour has got to keep campaigning much more strongly. We've seen, obviously everybody been out today. I've been to the West Midlands today campaigning, because for me this is about fairness, it's about the deal for working people. And I guess I do not want this country to be in the hands of the hard right of the Tory party if we see a
like
hit
Chris Grayling.
Exactly, to be honest, yeah, because look, Chris has taken away workers' rights. Chris has done all sorts of things to cut services.
I'm not aware of taking away workers' rights.
Well, right, let me give you for an example. What about making charges for people to go to an industrial tribunal, for an employment tribunal, for maternity cases or for sex discrimination, which has meant that those cases have now been slashed as a result, so people cannot implement their rights.
But you've got to remember that small business people are workers too, and they were at the end of a system where they were simply being exploited all the time in tribunals by people who are abusing the system.
But you accept that is a right that's been taken away?
Well, a right that's been taken away. They have still got the same rights to go to a tribunal, but what we're saying is you should put some money down first, and you'll get it back if you win.
Hang on, this is somebody who is pregnant, somebody who is, is on maternity leave, is struggling with all of the things that come from having a new baby, has been then sacked while they were on maternity leave. You're there, they're going to have some money aside to be able to then pay out hundreds of pounds to go to a tribunal to enforce their rights. Of course they aren't. You have taken away the rights from thousands of people. The number of cases has halved. The number of sex discrimination cases has gone down by 3/4. That is what you have done and your government has done. So don't tell me your government will protect workers' rights if we pulled out of Europe.
Before Chris comes back, because I'm sure he wants to, Ben in Clacton, just on this subject. Ben, what's your question?
Well, is it the policy of the Leave side to destroy conditions of employment gained through the European community? I mean, Peter Patel made that speech saying she was going to remove the burden of good conditions for employees.
Chris?
No, not at all. And look, the reality is there are different parts to this. I am not in favour of reducing the rights of workers in the workplaces, of making workplaces less safe. But what we are expecting our small businesses to do is to deal with huge amounts of bureaucracy, huge amounts of box ticking, process that is imposed upon them, often when they don't trade within the European Union at all. And that is at the cost of their time, their money, and often their ability to employ people. So this is regulation that costs our businesses millions of pounds each year and actually reduces their ability to hire people and reduces their ability to sell their goods around the world.
So which ones would you remove? Part-time workers' protection? Agency workers' rights, the protection if your job's privatised, the TUPE protection, or right to paid holidays, which ones would go? Because those are all the ones in the £600 million that Priti Patel has said she would ditch.
The rights to paid holidays existed before we were part of the European Union. And look, my point on this is very simple. Let me give you a practical example, Yvette. When we had the Gulf of Mexico oil disaster about 5 years ago, even though we have, as a result of accidents 30 or 40 years ago, the best safety standards, the best safety procedures in the world, the European Commission decided, in its wisdom or lack of it, to rewrite all of the safety procedures into its own form. The result of that has been extra cost for businesses at a time when they're struggling with the fall in the oil price. It's costing jobs, it's costing money, it's utterly unnecessary. It's box ticking for the bureaucrats in Brussels.
But we're part of writing the standards of health and safety and workers' rights across Europe, and it makes sure that we can't be undercut. Because if our companies are following good standards, but we have other companies across in France or Germany or Poland undercutting us because they ditch the health and safety standards, then our workers and our companies get undercut as well. I think what you've just admitted, Chris, you've just admitted what you want to do is cut workers' rights and cut workers' protection. That is what the Tories' Brexit would do.
Well, I've just given you an example of a completely meaningless change that cost business money to no purpose when we already had the best standards in the world.
Right, you can watch us live on the LBC website, lbc.co.uk, or you can watch us on our Facebook Live page. Just go to Facebook and search LBC. Right, let's get another question from Andrew, who's in Hackney. Hello, Andrew.
Oh, hi there, Ian. Hi, Yvette. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
I wanted to ask, is the dubious claim to control immigration worth sacrificing our economy for?
Yvette.
I think there's certainly quite a lot of false promises that have been made in this campaign. I think people do have a lot of concerns about immigration. Overall, it's something that's benefited Britain over very many centuries, but people also have concerns about things like dodgy employers exploiting immigration to undercut work wages and jobs. But I think your point is an interesting one, because I don't think actually immigration is likely to change very much if we pull out. And I think the most likely thing is that a government would be under huge pressure to sign a trade deal. You'd have, pressure of a recession, investment being cut. They'd end up having to sign a trade deal like Norway, like Switzerland, and probably signing up to the same immigration rules in the first place.
All the Labour voters who are understandably concerned about immigration that if we stay in, immigration is going to be at roughly the same level as it is now forevermore.
I think it's false promise what they're doing. So I do think.
I'm asking what you would be doing.
I think reforms are needed in a whole series of different ways. It's not easy. It's a complicated issue, and we do still need to benefit from international talent and trade. But for example, we should have much stronger employment rules to stop the employers.
No, fine. But the implication of what you just said was that immigration will remain at 350,000 every year for the foreseeable future if we vote to stay in.
It depends. That depends on how we engage with the European Union to reform things. And we've got the presidency of the European Union in 2017. Actually, we should be using that to be part of the debate across Europe about the reforms that are needed. Reforms to employment rules, reforms to benefit rules, reforms to border controls. For example, I've argued that the Schengen area should remove their border controls. Wider reforms to free movement that we should be part of within Europe, rather than trying to pretend that we'll come out, have a massive hit to our economy, and actually ending up going back to square one.
Yvette talked about false promises. Well, of course, one of the biggest false promises in my political lifetime has been David Cameron saying we will reduce immigration to tens of thousands, and that still remains official Conservative Party policy. there's no way that you can even hit that, even if you came out of Europe, out of the EU.
Well, I'm arguing that we should leave because we have, outside the European Union, the ability to control things. And, Yvette's avoiding the central issue here, which is that whilst we are in the European Union, we have no power to limit in any way the number of people who come and live and work here. We cannot even say to people, you need to have a job before you come here. It's illegal under European law. And whichever way you dice and slice this, that cannot change. There's no willingness to change. David Cameron sought permission to start to change it and was turned down. It's not going to happen.
The problem is, in the last year, 188,000 people have come in from outside the EU. So if you were serious about controlling immigration, that wouldn't be happening, would it?
Well, we've just passed an Immigration Act that is designed to make further inroads into that. Of course, we've been in power in coalition for the last 5 years, so this is the first purely Conservative...
No, for the last year, it's been the Conservative government.
We've just passed the first purely Conservative Immigration Act, went through Parliament about 2 months ago. We continue to take steps to try to bring down non-EU immigration. The central point, though, is EU immigration. We can't do anything legally about. There's nothing we can do. We can't pass an Act of Parliament introducing new restrictions. I mean, Yvette talks about negotiating Europe with reforms, and I'm not sure what she meant by removing border controls from the Schengen area. There aren't any anyway. But the reality is...
restoring them. I think we should... I think the Schengen area should restore its internal border controls. I mean,
we're
not
every
in Schengen.
Country?
Yeah, we're not in Schengen, so we're not affected by that anyway. But I actually think
so
if you want
Schengen
to stop
should
people
go
traffickers...
completely?
I've argued that for about 6 months, yeah. Because if you want to stop people traffickers and you want to stop people smuggling... For example, child refugees who disappear. If you want to stop people, smugglers, trafficking children across borders, then actually you need border checks in place to be able to do it.
That goes to the root of the European Union, though. I mean, you're arguing to remain in the European Union, but you're never going to get the big countries within the EU. I mean, we're not part of it, but the big countries within Schengen, they show no signs of going down that road.
Well, I think this is changing. You see, when I first argued this, which was back in September, October, everybody said, no, it'll never happen. Everybody's opposed to it. Actually, now, a lot of countries have now restored border checks within Europe, and Schengen is deteriorating in many ways. And I think that is an example of the way in which you can be in Europe and argue for change and get changes.
Right, let's see what our questioner thinks.
Well, there's an important point here. We haven't actually answered his question. Because he actually asked the question about the economy. He asked, is it worth sacrificing our economy for? I don't accept that premise at all, and the big reason why I don't, you have to remember that we are their biggest customer. We buy far more from the other European Union countries than they buy from us. We have a £60 billion a year trade deficit, and we're about 17% of their exports.
OK, look, we'll come on to the economy in a bit, I'm sure. Andrew, what do you think of what you've heard?
Well, I think Chris has a big issue to deal with, and that's that if we're going to control our borders in the way that he suggests he wants to, he's going to have to leave the common market, the trading arrangement which we have, which Norway and Switzerland have.
The single market, you mean?
Exactly, the single market. So without a single market, we're going to be facing tariffs. It's going to have a great effect on our economy, and the consequences are going to be very great, regardless of the fact that we need immigration. As you mentioned, we have more people coming from outside the EU at the moment than we have coming from inside the EU. So the consequences of getting this supposed control of our borders is going to be vast in terms of our economy. It's going to have huge impacts on all our lives.
Andrew, thank you very much for that. Just very briefly, on the single market, is it official vote leave policy that we come out the single market as well?
Well, I expect us to have a free trade agreement with the European Union. And the reason I disagree, Andrew talks about the imposition of tariffs, but we buy far more from them than they buy from us. So if we end up with World Trade Organization tariffs, the price of French dairy products in the United Kingdom, for whom we are the biggest customer, is going to rocket. Now, in what world will the French do that?
What percentage of Europe's exports comes to Britain?
It's about 17%.
8%. What percentage of Britain's exports go to Europe?
No, the figure is 17%. Outside the European Union, we will amount to 17% of EU exports. Now, there's
8% of their exports. And what percentage of our exports goes to Europe?
It's about 40%, and it's falling all the time.
44%, exactly. 44%.
So but we buy far more from them than they buy from us.
Well, this is simply nonsense, because 4 or 5 times more as a proportion of the economy, of their trade. And that's the thing. Okay. In the end, if it's just a minority of their trade and their exports that come to us, then they are in so much stronger a position for a negotiation and for a trade deal than us when it's nearly half of our exports that go to them. So, of course, we're going to be in a much weaker position in a trade deal.
We're not at all. We are 17% of their exports. We are their biggest overseas customer. We are a massive customer of things like the German car industry, the French farmers. They cannot possibly afford to put in jeopardy the 5 million EU jobs that depend upon you and I as UK consumers.
Then how come nobody else agrees with you? How come none of the economic institutions agree with you that you're going to get this magical trade deal that's going to be better than the deal that they give to themselves?
We haven't quite got to the Ask Me Anything round yet.
Oh, sorry, have I accelerated?
Very good impression of that. We will come to that in a second. But before we do, let's go to David, who's in Worksop. Hello, David.
Hello.
Hi, what would you like to ask?
The question is, I'm annoyed by the fact that the Remain campaign people, 2 or 3 different people in the last week have said this, are describing millions of hard-working, decent, ordinary people who have decided that they want to leave the European Union for a whole variety of different reasons. We're being described as Little Englanders, and I'm furious about it. And it's an offensive term. And in fact, it was on the debate with David Cameron a while back. Yeah. And I think if I'm voting Leave, but if I was in the middle, and if somebody described my possible issues either way, described me as a possible Little Englander, I'd be voting Leave. And it's putting ordinary working people off, and it's a real negative from the Remain, which is good. I want to leave, but it's a really offensive term, and I wish you would like to ask your 2 people there.
OK, well, we will. Yvette Cooper, is Little Englander an offensive term?
Do you know, I would not use that term at all. I don't think it's the right one to use. I'm proud to be English, was proud to support the England team, the match, and I'm proud to be British as well.
Aren't you quite little?
Only compared to you.
Quite. So you think it was wrong for the Prime Minister to really come out with that?
I don't think you should pit England against Britain. I think we can be proud to be English, proud to be British, and also think that England and Britain, and for me, for my constituency, Yorkshire, are stronger being part of Europe and working as partnership with other countries as well.
So, Chris, what were you throwing at the television when the Prime Minister called you a Little Englander?
I think I was doing another debate at the time, actually. But look, my view is that this is actually about a global perspective, not a European perspective. Europe is being left behind. It is an ever smaller part of the world economy. It's an ever smaller part of the world's trade. It's an ever smaller part of our trade. It's dropping all the time, even though Yvette's right to say it's 44% now, but that's down from 55% only relatively few years ago. So if you look around the world, we have a trade surplus outside Europe. We sell more to the rest of the world than they buy from us. In Europe, it's absolutely the reverse. I want more trade agreements around the world. I want to be able to trade with Commonwealth partners to a greater degree. These are opportunities we should be taking advantage of.
Why is it the Prime Minister comes out with these things? Because it was actually in this studio a few years ago that he called UKIP supporters, what was it, fruitcakes, closet racists and something, loonies, I think he said. I mean, it's not exactly a way to win votes, is it?
Well, look, I mean, the Prime Minister will have to answer for himself about what he says.
But does it make you angry when you hear him do these things?
I mean, I'm just going to make my own case. I mean, I think what's encouraging is the way in which I feel that people around the country are starting to really have a sense that they want their country to be independent again. They want to be bold. They want to be outward-facing in the world. They don't want to be trapped in a bureaucratic machine in Europe that's going nowhere.
Right, you can watch us live on the LBC website, lbc.co.uk. You can see what Little Englanders we all are, and you can watch us also on the LBC Facebook page. Right, it's the first of our Ask Me Anything rounds. Now, this is where our 2 contributors get to quiz each other, with me hopefully taking a bit of a back seat. Chris Grayling, would you like to quiz Yvette Cooper for 5 minutes or so?
So, Yvette, the principle that the European Union has, called subsidiarity, is all about powers being passed back from Brussels to member states. Can you name any powers that have actually been handed back from Brussels to member states?
Well, I think you should have as much decided at local level as possible. I think you should have as much decided at national level as possible. We have got agreement now, I think, eventually, partly as a result of Labour MPs calling for it, for VAT to be removed from tampons, rather than that be something that should be restricted at the European level. But I think there's also a lot of things, frankly, that should be handed down from Westminster, down to Yorkshire, down to local areas as well. So I think there's a bit of a myth that somehow everything should stop at Westminster. And I think if all we do is have more power sucked into Westminster, actually that doesn't help communities across the country.
But you didn't really answer my question, because we've seen lots of powers go from the UK to Brussels. There's been lots of talk over the years about reform. Indeed, the Remain campaign keeps talking about staying in a reformed European Union. But are there actually any examples of powers? You talked about tampons, but that's just a change decision at a European level. Are there any examples of powers that have been passed back from Brussels?
Sure. And I mean, as you know, I will often be the first to criticise your Prime Minister. But I think, to be fair to him, he did get some things out of the negotiation, including the ability for us to restrict benefits for people who, when they first arrive in Britain, because actually I think you should pay in before you can claim anything. I think that was a sensible thing. And also to have further restrictions in terms of not having ever closer union and other safeguards as well. So I think that was a step forward. Personally, I'd like to see further reforms, but I'd also like to see us actively playing a role in Europe and arguing for things that we want to see change. For example, cracking down on some of the tax havens and some of the way in which global companies avoid paying their tax. We can far better do that, actually, if we work with other European countries than simply try and do it on our own.
Now, we know that there are a whole range of new powers that Brussels is planning to take after our referendum's out of the way in the area of social policy, in the area of what they call citizenship policy. But we don't have any examples of powers coming back. So why should the public think that they're not on a path towards more Europe?
But you've just passed a law a few years ago that actually would require there to be another referendum if that happens. So if there's any further powers passed from Britain to Europe, there would have to be another referendum. Now, I think, when all of us have just had this referendum, I think, there's no particular desire to have another one or every few years. So I think there would be, it would prevent there being further powers be transferred to Europe as a result, and have that safeguard, that check for people right across the country to prevent it happening.
But that's not right, is it? Because there are new laws being passed in Brussels all the time. And if you look at what they're planning, for example, a whole range of reforms for the euro area, which includes social policy reforms from which we have no opt-out. So if there are changes, for example, they talk about changes to access to healthcare, for example, do we have an opt-out from that?
Of course, we are not going to have our NHS affected by decisions that are made in the Eurozone. But that's exactly why you've got that safeguard, that lock, that referendum lock that you passed, that your government put forward, and that I think you championed, Chris. That referendum lock was put in place to prevent further powers being transferred to Europe. So,
but the existing rules on access to healthcare apply to us already, and if they make those deeper, pass through on a majority in the European institutions that affect our health service more, where's our opt-out from
and
that?
And you know that there was also an additional safeguard that was agreed to prevent Britain being disadvantaged by decisions that were taken in the Eurozone. And again, I think that's a good thing. Now, I think there's a whole load of problems with the Eurozone. I think that there's a lot of problems with the way in which Germany has treated Greece. I think there's a lot of problems in the way in which the Eurozone works. We are thankfully, rightfully out of the Euro, and I never supported us being in the Euro, but I think to say that we should be somehow, because of problems in the Eurozone, we should pull out of Europe altogether, actually that would be to hurt us, to harm ourselves, and to hit our economy and to hit jobs.
But am I right in saying that the Eurozone countries now have a majority on the European Council, aren't I?
That's right, but exactly why you need the additional safeguards in place.
So if they take steps to pass new laws under the existing treaties to change the rules on access to healthcare, change the rules on skills, change a whole range of other different measures that can affect us, we don't have an opt-out, do we?
But see, we have three things that help us. The first is we have the assurance that we have got, the agreement that the Prime Minister just got, that decisions cannot be taken in the Eurozone that can damage Britain or can harm Britain's interests. The second is that we have the safeguard of the referendum lock, which means there would have to be another referendum, heaven forbid.
Well, not if it's under the existing treaty.
If actually more powers were passed
not
to
under
Europe.
The existing treaty, it's
and
just a normal
the third thing
law.
Is also actually just the power of argument. We should just get in there and argue for things. 97% of votes in the European Council, Britain wins. That is far more successful, frankly, than I ever get in the votes in Parliament. I lose far more votes in Parliament as a Labour MP.
We have to take a break for the news. Chris Grayling, thank you very much indeed for that. We will have Yvette's Ask Me Anything in just a few moments. We'll be back after the news. This is LBC. I'm Ian Dale. It's 6:32.
Barack Obama says the gunman who shot dead 49 people at a gay nightclub in Orlando was a homegrown terrorist. Authorities say Omar Mateen had pledged allegiance to the Islamic State group. Police patrols in London are being stepped up following the shootings. Vigils are being held across the UK this evening, including on Old Compton Street in Soho. And 6 England fans have now been given jail sentences in France over violence at Euro 2016. UEFA is threatening to disqualify both England and Russia following clashes between supporters. The business news: Microsoft is buying the professional networking site LinkedIn for around £18.5 billion. House-building giant Persimmon has defended plans that could see senior managers sharing in a £600 million bonus pot. And Royal Mail has made an improved offer to thousands of managers who'd been threatening to go on strike over pay. And the FTSE 100 closed down 70 points at 60.44.
LBC Business. With British Airways from London City Airport. Just 20 minutes by train from London Bridge.
LBC weather: heavy showers slowly easing during this evening, some patchy rain overnight and a low of 12 degrees. The LBC travel news is next.
Ian Dale at Drive on LBC.
6:33. Chris Grayling and Yvette Cooper are here with us in the studio debating the EU referendum. You can watch us at lbc.co.uk, or I've just flicked on the LBC Facebook page. Some very interesting comments that you're making as we go forward. Let's go to the calls. Let's go to Tina, who's in Camden. Hello, Tina.
Yes, hello. Hello, Ian. Hello, Chris. Hello, Yvette.
Hi.
Hello there.
Hello. I've got a question that's quite dear to my heart because it really worries me. I'm a European citizen that has been living in London for 30 years now, but I haven't acquired British citizenship. Now, what will happen to my rights, for example, access to benefits and the NHS after a Brexit?
Chris Grayling.
Right, the answer to that is there's no change for you. Under the Vienna Convention, even if rules around residency change, those people who have been here under the previous regime, their position is protected. That's right and proper. It applies to people in this country and elsewhere. And it's international agreement that goes beyond the European Union about how you make sure you look after people who find themselves in that position.
So my friends who've just retired to Spain, who I'm going to visit on holiday in a month's time, they needn't worry that they're going to be ejected from Spain, even though they've only been there like less than a year.
No, once you have moved somewhere under the Vienna Convention, you are safe to stay there.
Yvette, are you reassured by that?
I think the truth is there's a lot of uncertainty about this. There are some rights that would be protected, but there's an awful lot of just uncertainty about what rules would apply, what would happen for your friends who've gone to Spain or gone to retire, and when they come back again and then they go again, what will happen to them? Will that be restricted in future? And the truth is that nobody knows because we don't know what the deal is that is going to be struck.
Chris has just outlined the deal. It's all in the Vienna Convention.
Well, it's talking about sort of certain rights that would be historic. But if, what is your entitlement going forward for the future for, I don't know, for things like health care and so on? The truth is there's just a lot of uncertainty about it.
Tina, are you reassured at all?
Well, not quite really. I mean, especially in regards to benefits, because I'm not very well at the moment, so I have to claim benefits. So I'm really quite worried what will happen to those. And I also live in social housing.
Well, nothing. I mean, I say your rights as somebody resident of the United Kingdom don't change and can't change under the Vienna Convention. It only affects people going forward.
OK, let's move on. Paula is in Oxford. Paula, what's your question, please?
Okay. Democracy, people's rights and accountability. We talk about every 5 years we have an election, okay? So the politicians are accountable if they're not doing the right job. This would apply with the EU. Now, if we decide to stay in and it's not going as according to plan, do we not have the right to have a re-election, another referendum, surely in the rights of democracy and people's rights, and holding the politicians as accountable for anything that goes downwards if we decide to stay in? Surely we have that right for another referendum down the road.
There's a lot of appetite for more referendums, Yvette.
No, gosh. I'm not sure actually there'd be huge appetite for repeated referendums when you see some people are kind of looking a bit weary about this. I mean, look, I think it's a really important referendum that we are having right now, and we are a sovereign country. We have a sovereign parliament, so the truth is that Parliament could decide at any time. Actually, Parliament could decide to pull out of Europe. Parliament could also decide to have another referendum, and it would be possible, certainly if there was any change in the rules and any change in the powers relationships between Britain and Europe, to have a referendum in those circumstances as well. But I think the truth is people need to kind of focus on this referendum and what's at stake. And where I think Paula does make a good point is what we will have to do is argue for further reforms in Europe, and that will be a challenge for us if we stay in, is to make sure we keep pressing for those reforms.
My friend who's in Spain has just texted me to say we voted to stay, but all Brits are very worried here. Just thought I'd share that with you. Chris Grayling, second referendum?
I think this is a one-off occasion, and I think people who feel instinctively that we should be outside the European Union cannot afford to wait around in the hope that a second referendum will come along at some point in the future. If you believe we're better off outside, you need to vote to leave now. And the whole point about this is that when Yvette talks about reform, there are going to be reforms in the European Union, but not in the way she's talking about. All of the impetus at the moment in Europe is towards closer integration, towards, within the Eurozone, creating a single governmental structure for the Eurozone. 10 years down the road, there is going to be something like a United States of the Eurozone, and two countries bolting on the edge of it, us and Denmark. Well,
it's just not where the politics is in Europe.
There's a certain logic.
Angela Merkel, Francois Hollande, the Italian government, the presidents of the big EU institutions have all said there needs to be political union. So, Yvette, I'm sorry, either you're right or Angela Merkel's right, and I know who I'm backing.
There are things that the Eurozone countries need to do to far better coordinate, but each of those individual countries across Europe is having debates with people across their countries about what is the right thing and about getting the balance right, and people wanting to make sure there is power locally and decisions are made locally.
Let me put a scenario to you, that there is a 52-48 result, one way or the other. This is supposed to be a once-in-a-generation referendum, but if the result is that close, and all the polls suggest that it might be, if it's that close, I mean, is your side, do you think, going to then be pushing for a second referendum if it goes against you by that kind of margin?
No, I mean, my view is that if we vote to remain, we remain. We do our best within the existing structures. I think in the future, this issue will come back, but it's not going to come back in the very near term.
Yvette, similar scenario to you. If there's a 52-48 vote, I mean, maybe within the 2 years that we have to negotiate our leaving, do you think there would be a call for another referendum?
I don't know, partly because I actually don't know what would happen in those first 2 years.
You're not ruling
I think
it out
would be
like he has.
very difficult. I think you have to take the decision that's been made. That is the decision that's been made, and I don't think you can kind of go against it at all. You've got to try and make that decision work. Do I know what would happen in those first couple of years? No, because I think there'd be a sort of risk of recession. But I don't think you should be trying to unravel a decision that the public have made.
What about this idea that MPs, because there is such a Remain majority of MPs in the House of Commons, that you could actually retain single market membership and go against the wishes of the people in a referendum?
Again, I don't think it would be right for Parliament to try and unravel the decision that the public have made. What is unclear, though, is what the trade deal would be, because that would be up, presumably, for the government to try and negotiate as to what the trade deal would be. And look, none of us know what that's going to be.
Don't forget, you can watch us live on the website, lbc.co.uk, and on the LBC Facebook page. We'll have Yvette's Ask Me Anything in just a second, but first, Sandra is in Chertsey. Hi, Sandra.
Oh, hello. Thank you for taking my call. My question was, would it be easier to get rid of the foreign criminals if we leave the EU?
Yvette?
I actually don't think it would, for two reasons. First of all, we've now just finally got a directive which makes it easier. That's a European rule in place which makes it easier to deport people from our prisons who are European citizens. And the problem we've had with countries all over the world is not being able to deport them. And then that's a mix of Home Office and Justice Department bureaucracy and screw-ups, and also resistance by other countries to taking their citizens back. Now that we've got that European rule in place, that actually makes it easier to deport foreign criminals to European countries than it does to other countries all over the world. The second reason, of course, is the European arrest warrant, which allows us to deport over 1,000 people a year to go and face trial, often in their home country, and stop them fleeing here for justice. And we would lose that as well if we were outside Europe.
Chris?
Well, I think it would be, because for a start, we would not be bound by the European Charter of Fundamental Rights. Only recently, this country tried to deport Abu Hamza's daughter-in-law and was unable to do that. Now, that's a crazy situation in my view. Somebody who our courts regard as a security threat to our nation, the European Court has told us we can't deport. So I think it would be easier. It enables us to make our own laws.
But that's not to do with the European Union, is it?
It is, the European Court of Justice. Of course, we have a lot of talk about the European Court of Human Rights, but the European Court of Justice has a document called the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which is actually the Convention on Human Rights with lots of extra rights added to it that Tony Blair promised us wouldn't apply to this country, but actually has ended up applying to this country. And it's something where we actually have no choice. If it rules today, that is our law tomorrow. It is effectively our Supreme Court within the European Union.
OK, right. Yvette Cooper, your chance to quiz Chris Grayling for 5 minutes.
So, I know I asked him some of my questions earlier. I think my biggest question is, do you think there will be a shock to the economy straight away?
Well, I don't believe there will be a significant change to the economy, and I don't believe there needs to be a shock to the economy straight away. And indeed, Lord Stuart Rose, who runs the Remain campaign, said on the day after we leave the European Union, people will notice very little difference. And I think the big thing that people...
So you think there won't be a hit to investment or to uncertainty or to the pound that will affect jobs or unemployment?
Well, it's only 2 months since the Governor of the Bank of England said that the biggest threat to our domestic economy was from the situation in China. So he clearly did not see that as top of the list of threats, or Brexit as top of the list then of threats to the United Kingdom economy.
Do you disagree with Mark Carney then when he says there is a risk of recession if we pull out? He's the Governor of the Bank of England.
Well, he said that the biggest risk to our economy was the situation in China.
But who else agrees with you that there is no risk to our economy, no risk to jobs?
Well, if you look at some of the figures that the various
any
statements
economic
recently
institution, like the Bank of England, the IMF or the OECD or the LSE or the big economic institutions, do any of them think there is no risk to the economy straight away if we pull out?
Let me give you 2 examples. First of all, the chief economist of the World Bank said he thought our trade would increase and improve if we were outside the European Union. And let me also say, if you take the example of the
impact straight away.
Let me take the IMF figures for you then. Let me explain those. The IMF figures, on which a number of recent statements by the Remain campaign have been based, assumed that the pound would fall and at the same time our exports would fall. Now that's illogical, because if the pound falls, our exports become cheaper and more of them sell. So there are some serious flaws in the analysis that's been put forward.
So you think you're a better economist than Mark Carney, the Bank of England governor, than the LSE, the IMF, the OECD?
Well, I'm simply saying that it's the Governor of the Bank of England who said the biggest threat to our economy was the situation in China, and he said that in March.
He can also be suggesting there are more than one threat.
We said the biggest threat was the threat from the situation in China.
Does that mean that pulling out of Europe is not a threat?
Well, I certainly thought that Lord Stuart Rose, the man who runs the Remain campaign, who is a senior businessman who has extensive experience in major companies, he has said, well, I think back, economists are not always right, but the leader of the campaign you are part of said on the day after we leave the European Union, people will not notice a difference.
But what about the economists? What about the big institutions who are all saying that there is this big threat to our economy? Because, look, who's going to invest? If you're a big business, you're going to worry about your investment. You're going to think, oh, well, we'll just wait and see what happens because of the uncertainty. You're going to hold back.
So why then has the German stock exchange chosen this moment to spend 2.4 billion euros on a merger with the London Stock Exchange? They clearly don't think there's big turmoil ahead. Otherwise, why would they be doing that deal?
Considerable advantages to getting into financial services if we're about to pull out of Europe, because it'll be service sector.
Well, investing in London, that doesn't make sense.
Let me ask you another question. Can you name a country which is outside the single market, as the Leave campaign wants, and has no tariffs on anything?
Well, yes. We have the example of the truck plant, the van plant rather, that moved from Southampton to Turkey. Those same vans are still being sold in the European Union, tariff-free, and there is no freedom of movement between Turkey and the European Union.
So you're saying that we should go down a Turkey model and have no tariffs?
I think we should have a United Kingdom model, and the reason we will have a United Kingdom model is because we are their biggest customer. But you asked me if there's an example of a country where there is free trade, where there's no freedom of movement.
A country that has no tariffs on any of its goods.
Well, those vans that were once made in Southampton are now being made in Turkey. They were sold previously in Southampton without tariff. They're now being sold in the European Union without tariff, but they're being made in Turkey, and there's no freedom of movement.
Turkey has tariffs on its goods.
Well, so how
agree?
come those vans are being sold tariff-free in the European Union?
But some goods aren't covered by tariffs, but an awful lot of goods are. I'm asking you,
Turkey's part of the customs union.
Are there countries that have no tariffs on their goods?
Well, there are
outside the single are outside the single market.
Well, as the Remain campaign keeps telling us, there are 53 countries around the world with which the European Union has free trade agreements. So yes, there are.
But in all of those agreements, there are tariffs on some things. There may be tariffs on services. There may be tariffs on agricultural goods. There may be tariffs on fisheries. And
why then would the countries of the European Union, France and Germany and others, put tariffs on their own goods? Because we buy far more from them than they buy from us. And so therefore, if there are tariffs on trade, it's their jobs that suffer.
But they sell a small proportion of their exports come to us.
Well, 17%, that's quite a lot.
Half of our exports go to them. Why do you think that they would give us a better deal than they've got if we pull out?
It's about the deal we also give them, and they need access to our market. We are 17% of their exports. The French farmers, the biggest lobby group in France.
Your time.
The problem is, Chris, there's one more thing. Is that this is kind of like you're saying that we're about to get divorced, but somehow you're going to be better off and not have to pay anything for the kids and take all the assets and have much higher income. How many people really think they're going to get a better deal if they divorce from their ex?
I should explain that Yvette Cooper and Chris Grayling are not married, so they can't even get divorced. Thank you very much for your Ask Me Anything round. We'll come to your calls in just a second. You're listening to the LBC EU referendum debate with Chris Grayling and Yvette Cooper. You can watch us live on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk or on the LBC Facebook page. Lucy's in Barnet. Hello, Lucy.
Hello, Ian.
What was your question?
My question is for probably mainly Yvette first.
Hello, Lucy.
Hear from Chris. Hi, Yvette. Thank you for a good debate. This is one of the best I've heard so far.
Good.
Where you're discussing real issues that we care about. Now, just to give you a context of myself, I am a non-EU immigrant who's British black from a Commonwealth country, and I'm a Labour supporter, and I also am a Corbyn supporter, but I'm voting Leave. I have met many, and I do know enough people that are in my position. Why is it that so many people are voting Leave who are, tick all those boxes for Labour? I'm just a bit curious because I'm meeting enough people.
Well, let's see.
Well, Lucy, what's your reason?
The message hasn't got through, has it?
No, I think that we've got a lot of work to do. I was just interested, Lucy, what's your reason for voting out?
As somebody from a Commonwealth country who I also came in as a non-EU immigrant just to study at the time, I have paid taxes. I have had it quite tough, actually, to become legalised. And then because I got married, then I am British now, but eventually I thought I would go back to my Commonwealth country. But as a taxpayer, I think I'm a bit disillusioned by some Labour aspects, other than now Corbyn and the fact that he's bringing a bit more interest in.
Okay, all right. Sure. Okay, Yvette.
I mean, I think, look, Jeremy Corbyn's made really clear we should be part of Europe. We should be remaining.
Clear? Yeah. Really clear?
And
7 out of 10 clear. That's what he said on the last leg, isn't it?
There's lots of people who think that there are problems with the European Union, including Jeremy, including many of us who think there are things that need to change, but we still think
but you would have liked him to be stronger on it, wouldn't you? Come on, be honest.
Yeah, but I'm not expecting him to be a fan of every aspect of the European Union, because I don't think any of us should be. We should be arguing for more reforms, but he's given a very strong message that for something like workers' rights, for something like the investment in our National Health Service, which would be put at risk if the economy is hit, if jobs are hit, public finances are hit, for the sake of that sense of, of dealing with climate change and all of those challenges in the future, all of those I think are about Labour values and about social justice. So I think there is a really strong Labour case to be, to be part of Europe.
Why is no one really making it? When 45% of Labour voters don't actually know that Labour is campaigning for that is a pretty lamentable performance.
Yeah, look, every Labour Party member, everybody, through from the leadership right through across the whole party has to do a lot more in the last few days before the actual vote.
Because it could be that Labour voters win it for Brexit.
Well, I really hope that people will hear what Jeremy's saying. I think obviously we want him to say as much as possible to be campaigning for this, but also the things that Gordon Brown has been saying today about, we should be leading in Europe, not leaving Europe. We should be arguing for much stronger action, for example, against global corporations who are not paying their taxes. Let's take action together to get them to pay taxes. Let's work together to create 500,000 jobs.
That you'd like him to speak a little bit more and a little bit louder.
I certainly want him to speak louder. I want everybody to speak louder because we've got, there's an awful lot at stake. And I do worry that this in the end is about our kids' future. When they are dealing with all kinds of things coming down the track that we can't even imagine now, 20 years' time, when it's them who are taking the big decisions about the future of the country. I just want them to have friends and allies in the world. And that's partly about being part of Europe.
Chris Grayling, very quickly, because it's really
we've got friends and allies in the world. One of the things I would say, Lucy, is that we cannot even, if you look at where things are happening around the world economically, it's in Asia, it's in the Americas, it's in the Commonwealth. We are not legally even able to do our own free trade deals with our own Commonwealth partners that would benefit both of us. That is one of the consequences of having given up control of so many of the ways we govern ourselves. And surely we should change that. Surely we can be a big, strong, proud nation, the fifth biggest economy in the world, dealing with people around the world, not subsumed into a European superstate.
But a lot of those Commonwealth allies are urging us to stay in. If you look at Australia, if you look at India, if you look at Canada, so many of other countries that we have those strong relationships with, and rightly so, are saying we should be in. We are in a unique position because we're in the European Union and the Commonwealth and NATO and the UN Security Council.
None of those countries would
actually, in all of them.
None of those countries would actually give up to the degree that we have their ability to govern
themselves.
But
that's because they're not on Europe's doorstep. They've not got the channel just right there.
Just before we move on to the next question, at 7 o'clock, I'm told, there's going to be a big announcement from pro-EU Labour figures who's going to argue that David Cameron's migrant deal is insufficient and new controls are required. There are rumours that might be a certain Ed Balls making this announcement. Yvette, is this news to you?
I don't think Ed is saying anything different to what he has always said, which is that we do need reforms in Europe. That I think he said a couple of times that the Prime Minister's deal was only the start and we need more reforms.
So it's not going to be you making this announcement?
Which announcement?
About the migrant deal not being sufficient.
Yeah, I mean, I think it doesn't. I think there's got to be more done. I think you've got to have...
Where's the evidence that there's any willingness to go further? David Cameron sweated blood. I saw him do it to get this deal, and yet it achieved very little. Where is the evidence of any willingness elsewhere in the European Union to do the kind of deal you're talking about?
OK, let me give you a series of areas where I think you could go further. We could change employment rules very quickly to have much stronger rules to prevent undercutting, to prevent agencies bringing in workers from abroad in order to undercut pay and jobs. You could have
that was
changes...
all illegal by the European Court.
Well, no, you could make those changes and you could get that agreement across Europe to do so. We could strengthen, for example, the Posted Workers Directive in order to do that. I think we should be going further as part of the Britain's EU presidency, which starts next year. I think we should be building an alliance to say, actually, free movement does need to be reformed. There are more reforms that are needed. And I would just cite as evidence that things are changing in Europe the fact that Schengen, they have reintroduced border controls in many areas in the Schengen area that 6 months ago no one would agree to.
Just to round up on this, it could be Ed Balls making this announcement.
I don't think Ed's going to say anything different to what he's said previously.
But he might be saying something.
I think he's just going to carry on saying what he's always said. But you'd have to ask him. But,
right, let's go to...
So, yeah, there are reforms that are going to be needed, and we should be part of them within Europe rather than pretending we can do something
Let's go to
outside.
Richard in Rochester. Hi, Richard. What's your question, please?
Hi, good evening. Yeah, it's quite clear that sooner rather than later Turkey is going to become a member of the European Union. What do you think the time frame is for that? And more importantly, do you think it's a good idea to extend the borders to Syria and Iraq?
Chris?
Well, I think it's certainly going to happen. I don't know on time frame. At the moment, the European Union is trying to accelerate the process.
It's going to happen yesterday.
It's not going to happen yesterday. But what we know right now is that the European Union is in active discussions with the Turkish government. They are looking at ways of accelerating the process of moving Turkey towards membership. They're spending very substantial amounts of money in helping Turkey move towards membership. And, of course, it's our government's policy to support Turkey becoming members. Those are all facts.
I think this is so dishonest of the Leave campaign. What they concluded is that they weren't able to scare people enough just by talking about the reality of the situation, and so therefore they had to start claiming Turkey is joining the EU.
So which of the things I've just said are not true?
76 million people are about to arrive, and what we know is that Turkey has met 1 out of the 35 criteria that it has to meet. If it carried on at the current rate of progress, it would take, 1,000 years. Cyprus is vetoing it. Greece would veto it too. And of course, Britain has a veto as well. We also have the ability to change the free movement rules for new countries coming in. So I think this is just dishonest from the Leave campaign.
But we only have 90 seconds left. Richard, thank you for that. Let's quickly go to Douglas in Ashford, who's got a very important question. Douglas, what is it?
Yes, the question is to your two people there. As David Cameron says that we should remain in the EU, when on the 24th it comes that we're going to leave the EU, should he do the right thing and resign because he would not be the right person to then lead the country? If you don't agree, why not?
No, he shouldn't, because we are going to need both his expertise, his relationships with other European leaders. If we voted to leave, I want to get on with the job of leaving. I want to use all the expertise we've got to do that. And the last thing I want is a Conservative leadership contest to distract us from that.
Would you like to see a Eurosceptic future leader of the party, though, when David Cameron does go?
Well, I mean, that's years and years ahead. And would I like to see somebody who believes in Euroscepticism? By then, I hope we'll have left and the question won't arise.
Yvette?
I don't want this referendum to be about David Cameron. I think it's about something much bigger than that, which is our country's future. And I also think,
But surely he'll have no alternative but to resign. If we vote for Brexit, his policy has completely failed.
I think the problem for Labour voters and for Labour communities that would all actually be much harder hit by recession, much harder hit by manufacturing industry being hit, much harder hit by public finances being hit. The problem for Labour communities and for Labour voters is that actually if it wasn't David Cameron, it would probably be an even more right-wing or Thatcherite member of the Conservative Party who would be doing the negotiations and who would be putting our public services and our jobs at risk.
I'm afraid that brings us to the end of our debate. Yvette Cooper, Chris Grayling, thank you very much indeed. On Thursday at 4 o'clock, we will be having another debate with Andrea Leadsom and Harriet Harman. I will be back tomorrow from 4, but coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins. Next, though, Beverly Turner.
Thanks, Ian. This is Bev with you until 10 o'clock tonight, so stay with LBC. At 9, it's the Money Hour on debt. And at 8, the bizarre bid by London's new mayor to ban posters which objectify women. You can't do that, Sadiq Khan, without also banning the male six-packs. But first, 36 hours after America's worst mass